The real discussion today so far has been a reaction to what happened yesterday with the Donald Trump tariff announcement. And to some degree, and we talked about this yesterday afternoon, and I think a lot of people probably agree, Canada got off, if we can say lucky, dodged a bullet. It doesn't matter the term you use, but basically we did not have any new tariffs put on Canada. We're still dealing with the existing ones, which include aluminum and steel and all the others, and the auto tariffs, although there's some question as to what specifically they apply to. But then today, Mark Carney, acting as Prime Minister, announced that we're going to do the same thing to the U.S. that the U.S. has done to us, at least with respect to auto tariffs, imposing a 25% tariffs on cars coming into Canada from the U.S. My question when we first talked about this was, what does this mean at the end of the day, not just for the industry, but anybody out there considering buying a car? So let's dig in. Greg Layson's a digital editor at Automotive News Canada and is on the line. Greg, thanks for making the time. Appreciate it.
No problem. Anytime. Thanks for having me.
So let me start with that question first of all, because here's what I didn't understand in Mark Carney's announcement today. He said it applies to cars brought into Canada, but it does not apply to auto parts, at least not as they relate to satisfying the CUSMA agreement. What does that mean exactly?
So what Mark Carney announced today is this, that auto parts on their own as standalone products or pieces that will be used in assembly in Canada will not face a tariff. So let's just use widgets for a simple word. If a widget is made in Michigan but needed in auto assembly in Ontario, it will not face a tariff when it crosses the border. However, if a finished product, let's say a Jeep from Toledo, crosses the border, crosses the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor to be delivered somewhere in Quebec, then whatever content in that Jeep was produced in America and America only faces a 25% tariff. Now, that's probably about 40%, 50%, 60%, depending on the market and the region of that vehicle. That's how this is going to work.
Okay, I'm confused. I get the part about auto parts. If you buy them independently and they're not already in the cars, I get that they're not tariffed. But
correct.
Take your example of the Jeep that is coming in from, we understand part of that Jeep, an engine is manufactured in Canada, something else is manufactured in the U.S., I don't know, maybe something else in Mexico. How would it work? Who's going to break that down?
That is the job of our fantastic workers at the border, our customs agents. And the onus is on the importer. So, Stellantis Canada, if we're going to use a Jeep as an example, they are responsible for telling Canada how much of the value of that Jeep is American made and therefore subject to a tariff. Vice versa, a minivan made in Windsor, sent to the United States, it is up to Stellantis on the United States side of the border to tell U.S. Customs and Border Patrol how much of that vehicle, what percentage is Canada made, and therefore that percentage faces the tariff. It is incredibly confusing. It is a lot of paperwork and red tape for automakers on both sides of the border, and that is time and money beyond just the tariff that is costing the automakers, and it will be passed on to the consumer. So not only are we going to face the rising costs based on just the tariffs alone, but the additional workload of the automakers, those accountants and lawyers that have to sort this out sooner rather than later.
Okay, that's a great explanation. I will ask you, though, bear with me here. Let's stay with the Jeep for just a second. So let's say that Jeep costs, I don't know, what would it cost here in Canada? $30,000, $35,000? I have no idea. What would it cost?
You use a round number of $50,000. That's the average transaction price right now in Canada for all vehicles.
Okay, so of that $50,000, let's say there's less than 50% of U.S. parts in that car. Does it still get tariffed, or is it only if it's over 50%?
No, the portion that is American-made gets tariffed. So if we use $50,000 as a round number, let's say $25,000 of that is American-made product, tires, brakes, widgets, door handles, whatever. That $25,000 in value faces the 25% tariff. So essentially, it's a 12.5% tariff total on that vehicle because not all of it is going to be tariffed coming across the border.
Got it. Okay. Well explained. So bottom line, as I said when we started here, however this plays into, into effect, because it's going to go into effect on both sides of the border, everyone, whether you're here or whether in the U.S., you're going to pay more for a new car.
Absolutely. I think that's why it's important we have these conversations. I mean, I cover this for a living, 12 hours a day, every day, and I understand what's going on here, and I know the prices are going to go up. I don't think Canadians realize how much of a price increase this is going to bring to just about all vehicles. 40% of the vehicles we buy in Canada come from the United States. All of those vehicles, essentially, aside from a few niche vehicles, will face some sort of tariff at the border. On the flip side of that, I always use Ford as an example. We build Ford engines in Windsor, Ontario. None of them are put in a vehicle that is made in Ontario. They are all put in vehicles that are made, final assembly, in the United States. But those Ford Super Duties are shipped back here, and we buy them. We will, in effect, pay the duty on that engine that went to the United States because the automakers are going to pass all those costs on to Canadians. So whether we retaliated or not, there was going to be a price increase. Now there's a price increase on just about every vehicle sold in Canada moving forward.
Had we not retaliated, as Mark Carney announced today, right, and just left the tariffs in place on Canada right now, that the U.S. announced, yes, well, they announced it a while ago, but in effect, basically, I guess today or at the end of the week, that would have been a lower price increase, or would it not change the price for Canadians at all if we had not retaliated?
It would have been lower. It would have been lower because we had no tariffs on vehicles coming in. We would just be paying the U.S. tariffs on parts and vehicles that went to the States and then were shipped back to us. Now it's everything. And so by adding this, he is increasing the cost of essentially every vehicle sold in Canada, other than anything that's made in Japan and shipped here, or Korea and shipped here, or Vietnam and shipped here, or from the UK or EU.
Right. So those tariffs, which, by the way, the U.S. is imposing as well, right? If you're buying a car from Europe or Japan or Korea, as we learned yesterday, there'd be tariffs on all those cars. They will become much more expensive in the U.S.
That's correct. So let's use BMW as an example. If BMW ships the same vehicle direct to Canada, no tariff. If they ship that to the United States, tariff, and the Americans will pay that. So where you won't see a price increase is really on the luxury side of things. Right. The vehicles that come from the EU, mainly from Germany. You won't see any on anything that comes from Korea. So think Kia and Hyundai, for example. But everything that comes from America, and that's about 40%, almost 50% in some cases on some years, of vehicles that we buy come from the United States. And then, of course, whatever parts that ship back and forth across the border, that too will increase your sticker price.
Now, the only other question I have is, we all know Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. are part of the CUSMA agreement, right? And we know that as long as they're part of that, they don't get tariffed. Where does that come into play here?
So what the United States and Canada have done is the United States made its first move and said, look, there really should be no tariffs at all on any North American vehicles, but if we're going to put a tariff on, we're only going to tax the Canadian content. So it's not taxing the U.S. content that's in a Canada-made vehicle. It's only taxing the Canadian content. But legally speaking, the suppliers and the automakers believe that there should be no tariffs because we have a North American free trade agreement in that Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement. So I would not be surprised if at some point over the next 2 weeks, there are automakers and suppliers or a conglomerate of those taking the U.S. to court to fight this, saying, look, you have no right to impose these tariffs because we have a free trade agreement. This thing is going to get more confusing and more gummed up as we move along. Sooner than it's going to be sorted out. That's my fear in all of this. A lot of red tape, a lot of paperwork, and a lot of price increases in the short term. As
you understand it, Greg, just as we wrap up, when does this come into effect?
So right now, the tariffs on Canadian goods going over are in effect as of midnight last night. I believe Mark Carney's announcement goes into effect tomorrow. Now, the parts that go from Canada to the United States, they will not be tariffed until May 3rd because I hearken back to what I started with. They don't know how they're going to determine how much of each of those parts is Canadian versus American. They don't have the forms and the paperwork at the border yet worked out. but they say they will have that done by May 3rd. So your key dates were April 3rd, April 4th, and May 3rd. But right now, if you're looking for a new vehicle, go buy this month because the interest rates are out, the incentives are out, and whatever prices are on those windows and whatever rates are in place now should not change until May 1st. So if you're shopping, do it now.
Greg Layton, thank you so much, Greg. Really appreciate the time.
Yeah, anytime.
All right. Automotive News Canada is where he works. I think pretty well explained there, right? That's what's happening. That's when it goes into effect. And ultimately, yes, as he said, prices will be going up on both sides of the border. Yeah, it's confusing.